Well, hey there, folks, and welcome to The Roundup. We're a Cowboy State Daily podcast that focuses on interesting people in the Cowboy State. Today, in observation of the upcoming spookiest of holidays, we're steering away from the living people in Wyoming, and we're focusing on those departed souls who are still making their presence known. First, though, I want to take a minute to make sure you're all in the loop on another great podcast, the Business from the Basement podcast, which is supported by the Wyoming Business Alliance. And it's a fantastic resource for anyone who's a business person, who's interested in business, who could use some advice or some new ideas. Check out the Wyoming Business Alliance's Business from the Basement podcast. Now, on to the stories. All right, folks. For the first stop on our tour of haunted Wyoming spots, we're going to the newest member of our Cowboy State Daily team, Riley Strand. Riley's our videographer. He is my right hand. I'm so grateful to have him here. And he went out with Mark Hines. They went to the Laramie Plains Civic Center to explore some of the ghost stories. And so, Riley, so glad that you went to that. Tell us, first off, what are the haunted stories that you heard to get you there? Why did Mark say this is something we need to look up?
Yeah, so when a lot of ghost stories are told, it seems a lot of people comment on those and say, well, you should go to the Civic Center in Laramie. And it kept coming up. And there's a few stories that have surfaced out of the Civic Center. There's a girl on a tricycle, I think, that rides down the hallways at night, shadowy figures, voices, all sorts of stuff. There's a lot of history there, so a lot of potential for ghost stories, obviously.
And so when you went to the Civic Center, what did you discover? And who did you go with?
Yeah, so outdoors reporter Mark Hines and I joined Way Out West Paranormal, which is a paranormal investigation group based in Cheyenne. They drove over that evening, as well as the manager, I think his position was at the Civic Center. He's kind of the guy that looks after a lot of things. He does a lot of the maintenance on the building. So Way Out West Paranormal, obviously they believe in ghosts. The employee from the Civic Center does not believe in ghosts. So it was kind of a good push and shove of, uh, well, this is what we think is happening. Well, no, actually, that's not happening because it's actually just radio interference or whatever. So it was interesting to get both perspectives as we were walking around the building.
What did you find? Did you feel anything? Did you see anything?
Personally, there was definitely some spooky environments in there. I didn't feel any chills or anything like that. I didn't hear anything, but it's definitely eerie. I think you'd have to just, I guess, not be paying attention to not feel anything because it is definitely a spooky place. And there's an abandoned pool in the basement that was never used, that has no lights. We went down there, a fourth floor band room that looks straight out of a haunted house. We went up there. Other sections of the basement, like the boiler room, where you just would have to be pretty unimaginative to not get a little spooked. But even the skeptic, the employee at the Civic Center, said, yeah, I don't believe in ghosts, but like it is pretty creepy in here. So even he had to admit that.
That's great. Riley, thank you for the story. And folks, you're going to be looking for those stories from Mark and from Riley here on cowboystatedaily.com. All right, folks, for the next segment of our Haunted Wyoming podcast, we're going to Casper. We're going to Dale Killingbeck, who's our Casper reporter. And Dale has had the opportunity to talk to so many people about the historical, really interesting stories that have happened in that part of Wyoming. And Dale, one of your most interesting haunted Wyoming stories took place at Fort Casper. So give us a little bit of information about how they've discovered and what they've discovered there at Fort Casper when it comes to the paranormal.
Sure. Yeah, they allow people to come in a couple times a year, to kind of search the grounds, and they give them these paranormal ghost busting devices, and they allow them to go out on the grounds. But staff themselves have told me about things that have happened while they were there. And so some of the strange things that they found is that one staff member was telling me that she cleans the glass inside the museum, of the different displays. And so one day she was about to clean the glass and she sees the handprint of this little kid, but it's on the inside of the glass, down in the middle of the glass where there's no way that you can reach from the top and get a handprint down there. And they had never seen that handprint before. And all of a sudden there's this handprint of a little kid, that's on the glass in a display at the museum.
Oh my
And
gosh, I have such chills. Oh my gosh, that's creepy. Okay.
And then speaking of little kids, they told me another story about when they were actually doing an event. I think it was a ghost busting event that one of the museum staffers was sitting at a table and she sees this little boy running by and he's got plaid shirt on, suspenders and pants. And she said it didn't really look like it was like from the 1800s, but it looked unusual because it wasn't t-shirt or, the kind of things that kids typically wear today. And so the kid ran into another room. And so she got up and followed, and there was people in the room, but there was no evidence of the kid. And she asked about it. Nobody else had seen the kid. And then later on, she talked to another staffer who had spotted that same child wearing the same thing outside in one of the fort buildings. So again, there was no real explanation for those occurrences. They had no easy explanation about why that happened. And then I can tell another story if you want me to.
Yes, please, please. We want another story. What's your other story?
So on a Monday, there's two staff members inside the museum. The museum is not open that day, and they were both working inside the museum, I think in their office area, and all of a sudden they hear a door open, and the museum doors were all locked. They hear the door open to the back of the museum that goes out to the fort area, and they hear it close, and then they start hearing these hobnailed boots, which is what soldiers back in the day wore, walking down the floor of the museum. And so they were both looked at each other. And I asked them if they were scared, and they said no. They just believe that it's one of the regulars around the museum. So
That is so fantastic. Oh my gosh. To actually hear the boots of the soldiers at Fort Casper. That's
right.
Fantastic. Dale, thank you for sharing that ghost story for us. Folks, go to Fort Casper, talk to the staff there. They'll have the stories. Folks, for our next spooky ghost story, we're going to be going to Cowboy State Daily's Renee Jean. Renee has written extensively for the Haunted Wyoming series, and she's got a couple of stories that she's going to tell us about today where she has been personally affected by a ghost. And I love these stories. So, Renee, my understanding is you're actually, even though you've written a couple of really great ghost stories for Haunted Wyoming, you are actually a skeptic for these things. Tell us about this.
So I have a degree in chemistry and almost a second degree in life sciences. So, I, I don't know if I really believe in ghosts at all, but I have to admit I've had some experiences that I can't really explain scientifically. And one of them happened when I was just a kid. So every summer I go to visit my grandmother, and I spend a couple of weeks there. Usually my little sister would come with me. She's 10 years younger than I am. So I'm 15, she's about 5. Well, this particular summer, she didn't come with me. And when I get to Grandma's house, Grandma has bought this child-sized doll. And it is the creepiest thing I think I've ever seen. I mean, I was like horror show creeped out by this doll, but I didn't want to say anything because my grandmother was just so excited about her doll and the things she was going to put on it, and she was going to keep it in my room. And I'm like, oh, great. I'm going to have to sleep with the creepy doll. Well, so I did. I spent the night with the creepy doll watching me all night long. Nothing happened. I thought, okay, I'm okay. Nothing happened. Well, I'm sitting at the snack bar and I'm eating my breakfast cereal. My grandma's over there cooking her breakfast. I think she was making some eggs. And I haven't had any coffee. I was too young to drink coffee at that time, I guess. And I'm half asleep. And I could swear that my younger sister ran behind me, laughing and giggling, and then ran back to the back room. So I'm not even thinking about it. I'm half asleep. I jump off the bar stool. I run to the back room, and there's nothing there but this creepy doll. And the reason I ran back there is I'm like thinking, how could Leanne possibly be here? I know she didn't come with me. And she's not there. It's this creepy doll. I turn around to leave the room, and there is my grandmother right behind me. And I'm like, Grandma, what are you doing? She's like, well, I thought I heard Leanne laughing and giggling and running back to the back room. I'm like, "Oh, okay." Well, that's what I thought I heard too. Grandma got rid of that
Whoa.
doll. We never had to sleep with that doll again. She's got rid of it right away, and uh, I can't explain that. I mean, if it had just been me, I would be like, you know,
Yeah.
okay, I was
Yeah.
half asleep, apparently dreaming while I was awake or something. But
But
the fact that
grandma,
she did it too at the same time and didn't know what I thought was happening, that I cannot explain.
that is absolutely creepifiable. That's crazy. Okay. That's a great story. You
Okay.
recently wrote a story. You were at the historic Sheridan Inn and you were at the restaurant. You'd had a marvelous meal. And there's just a few people in the restaurant, and the waitress is cleaning up, and something unexplained happened. I want you to tell us what your experience was.
So I'm just sitting there kind of scrolling through some news articles. I do that every day, just kind of keeping up with what's going on in the world. What could I Wyomingize? Did something major happen on a topic I'm following? And I'm not really paying any attention, Wendy. I'm just enjoying myself. But I hear something and I see something out of the corner of my eye. And this is another thing that I just can't explain. I see the waitress running over and kind of upset and picking up a glass off of the floor. And as I'm watching what's unfolding, there's a whole table erupts and starts talking about, and I'm like, what the heck is going on here? So I start listening a little closer. That table had watched that glass move by itself and kind of twirl off the table onto the floor. And I'm like, oh, oh, I guess I need
Oh,
to get my reporter's notebook out and start taking some notes here because something just happened right almost in front of my eyeballs here.
wow. And the historic Sheridan Inn has been purported to be haunted, right?
Yes, yes, it has. There are lots of stories about it. Miss Kate, uh, you know, being the caretaker of the inn, and uh, but there's also the waitress told me about a clairvoyant trucker who came for dinner one night, and he told her that while he could see a lady standing in the doorway wearing like 1950s garb, she wouldn't come in the restaurant. But he did see like five guys at the end of the bar drinking whiskey, and that they moved to a closer table at some point during their conversation to listen in. And he said these ghosts are happy that people are in the restaurant now because it used to be so quiet and there was no music, and with people there there's energy, and they feel like they're living vicariously again. And so maybe the waitress's thought is these five whiskey drinking ghosts are, pranksters.
That's fantastic. Renee, that's a great story. So anybody, if you're going to the historic Sheridan Inn in Sheridan, obviously, be on the lookout for five whiskey drinking ghosts and a proprietor lady. So Miss Kate, that's so fun. Oh my goodness. Renee, thank you for your stories because you've got so many, you've written a lot of haunted Wyoming stories, and these are just a couple of the haunted Wyoming stories, but these are great. Renee, thank you so much. All right, folks, for our next set of ghost stories, we're going to go to Jackie Dorothy. Jackie is fairly recent to Cowboy State Daily. We are so glad we have her because she is such an experienced historian, but a writer of historical stories. And so we're so glad to have her with us. And in her writing and in her research over the years, she's uncovered a couple of really great ghost stories. So, Jackie, start off telling us about the Badwater Skeleton story.
This is a story that's actually creeped me out for years. I had to really do some digging to even find the full story, to find the historical references and see how real it was. And I'm going to let you guys decide if you think this is a real ghost story or if a figment of this family's imagination. So in the 1940s, October, of course, this family was digging a cellar for their house. They wanted to be able to store their vegetables, their canned goods, and the wife of the house had been begging for this cellar. So they were out there. They figured it was going to be a 3-day project, and they're digging along the banks of the Badwater. Now, the Badwater Creek is one that runs from Powder River all the way through Fremont County and empties into the Boysen Reservoir. So you cross over the Badwater Creek when you're going through to the Wind River Canyon, just to give you an idea of where it is. So then this family is digging up and they discover all of a sudden a shining, glittery thing is going through the air. And the dad shouts, "Stop!" His name is Orrin, by the way. So Orrin Litchie shouts out, "Stop!" He tries to stop the production, but it's too late. They had dumped the dirt out and buried a ruby ring. So they have this treasure that they're on their hands and knees digging through the dirt. He's convinced that it was a huge, sparkling, beautiful ring. They never did find it. They finally give up, start digging again. And then Catherine, who's at the log home, hears another shout. She looks out there and they're staring at the ground. It's blackened. It's been burned. They don't know what they've just reached. She walks over and is about to ask them, "Why did you guys stop?" when she looks in and sees a skeleton. They found the human remains of somebody that had been shot 5 times with 5 different arrows. And this was in this pile where they were digging the cellar. So one of her son was a 15-year-old, and Ray decided to took the bones home with him and put them under his bed. What teenager's not going to do that, right? So they continue digging the cellar. They get their cellar built. Ray, by the way, is sleeping by himself with these skeleton bones under his bed. And in the middle of the night, he's all alone and he hears a fluttering and he wakes up and sees a ghost. He's terrified. Turns out it's his mother's kitchen towels. So what is he going to do? He decides that it's still too much. And in the middle of the night, he takes the box of bones, crosses the Badwater Creek, goes into their barn and hides them in the rafters. And that's where these bones reside for years. And in the meantime, they have this cellar. And the mom is going down. Her name's Catherine, and she is down there stocking the shelves. She hears a moaning sound. And she thinks it's a wounded animal. It's the wind. She goes out. There is no animal. There is no wind. Goes back in, continues to stalk, and hears a crying woman. Freaks her out. And of course, she's home alone. So she goes and gets the old neighbor. Now, this guy is very sensible. He is just like salt of the earth, doesn't believe in all of this stuff. She takes him down into the basement. They're standing there. And he hears it. And she's like, "Do you hear that?" And he said, "I dang well do." And he took off running as fast as he could, never returned to that cellar. And the whole time this family lived on the homestead, she reported that she continued to hear that crying and that moaning, but she wanted her cellar, so she just put up with it. And that's the story of the Badwater Skeleton.
Wow, that is a great story. Oh my gosh. I wonder if anybody lives on that property now.
That's the question, because they did leave. And by the 1970s, the cellar itself, there's pictures of it being caved in. And they moved into the Thermopolis Pioneer home. It was brand new at the time. And they shared their story with the local reporter. And that's how we even have the story in the first place.
What you've got another story though.
Yes. Now, that was the very first one I wrote on Haunted Halloween, or Haunted Wyoming. And so the next one takes us to the Bighorn Mountains. There's a place up there. It's above Shell. A lot of people from Grable, Sheridan, they all go up there, and it's a great hunting area for elk. It's on Trappers Creek. Well, in 1951, a young hunter was up there with a group of men, his dad and a bunch of other hunters from Grable, and they got their elk. And he was sent back to camp, which was 2 miles away, to retrieve the pickup to pick up all of these elk that they had gutted and had ready to go. So it was only 2 miles away, which was over 2 canyons and a creek. His dad's like, this area, you'll be fine. We're not worried. Go for it. Well, he got there and he got disoriented on the way to the camp. A deep fog had descended. He didn't know where he was. He couldn't recall if he had gone over 1 or 2 canyons. And the terrain started getting really bad and steep, and he is just panicking at this point. And he said, I know what I should have done. I should have stopped. I should have built a fire. But for whatever reason, I just kept going. And he is freaking out. And suddenly the mist parts, and there is this boy standing there. He's wearing a red flannel shirt, and he looks down at him and he points the opposite direction which this young teenager is headed. So the hunter stops, looks at this boy, shouts at him, doesn't hear a response, and the mist closes in again and he loses sight. But he listens to what this boy said, turns and starts walking the opposite direction he was going. And within a few minutes, he hits the road and he's able to get to camp. If it wasn't for that young boy, he would have gone the totally different direction, gotten lost. The weather was setting in. Who knows what would have happened to the 17-year-old? Now, nobody when he did make it to the hunters, they didn't know what he was talking about. So later the next day, he went to another camp, talked to another hunter. And this hunter told him, I was lost in the fog too. And he describes this incident where the fog closed in. He did the same thing. He started panicking and he was walking through the fog, didn't know where he was. And suddenly the fog parted. This boy in a red flannel shirt looked at him and gestured for him to stop. Don't go any further. So the hunter stops, builds a fire, doesn't sleep at all that night because that boy had disappeared. And so that was 2 instances of this red flannel boy showing up and helping these hunters.
And it turns out, right, that the red flannel boy himself had died back in 1932? Is that correct?
Yes. Now, this gave me goosebumps because I had found this story and I knew about it, but I just felt certain that there had to be something to tie into it. So I spent over an hour researching through old archives, looking for a story of someone that was lost in the Bighorns. I got goosebumps because I was about to give up my search when I came across the story of Dylan McGinnon. This 17-year-old boy was lost in the Bighorns at Trapper Creek, same area, same circumstances. A blizzard had blown in. All these hunters were stranded up there in 1932, including Dylan. And he was last spotted at this certain area. And there was search parties sent out for him, but they had to go back because this thick fog had rolled in and they could not find Dylan. They had hoped and prayed that he would be okay. Unfortunately, Casper hunters stumbled upon his body 1.5 feet under the snow, and he had died during this blizzard. So the question remains, did Dylan come back to help other hunters who had suffered the same fate? Or was it a hallucination that was shared across the area?
Jackie, those are great stories. Oh my gosh. And you tell them so well. Thank you. Thank you for telling us these great ghost stories from Fremont County and from the Bighorn Mountains. Folks, there are so many great haunted stories. So many great haunted stories. Jackie, thanks for those.
Thank you for having me.
Folks, the next stop on our Haunted Wyoming tour is with our editor, our executive editor, Jimmy Orr. Jimmy has some fantastic stories that he's heard over the years, but he's personally experienced a couple of things too, which I think is fantastic. Jimmy, you have a story about St. Marks Cathedral there in Cheyenne, and you have had, I mean, just really an interesting conversation with Rick Veit. Introduce this segment here for us and this particular story, Jimmy. Where did you hear about this story?
All right, so it was, I think it was 1979, and I think I was in 7th grade, and the popular TV show back then, Wendy, as you recall, was That's Incredible. And so the That's Incredible crew came out to Cheyenne to investigate the St. Mark's Episcopal Church. And they did a 15-minute segment on it. And I was blown away by it. It was fascinating to me. And the whole story of how it became haunted. St. Mark's Church is the oldest church in Wyoming. And 1868, I think it was constructed. And so based on this, the appearance on That's Incredible. And all the kids were talking about it at school, right? And so my buddy Scott Hickman went to St. Mark's, and I talked to him about it. And he said, well, I bet I could get you a conversation with the rector, Eugene Todd. And so I wanted to do a story on it. And so, and this is a couple of years later, I was in 9th grade. And so I had an interview one-on-one with Rector Todd, and he was great. And so I wrote a report on it. But he took me into a friend of mine and me, he took us into the bell tower, took us up to the bell tower, and gave us the whole story of what happened. Now, this is what makes it great. The story is of 2 Dutch stonemasons who were building the bell tower in the 1800s, late 1800s. And the original church, by the way, is in Hannah, Wyoming, which is also fascinating in itself. But they were building this bell tower, and one fell to his death. The other one didn't speak English, and so he was afraid that he would get strung up for it. And so what he did is he buried his buddy in the wall. And so these walls are thick. I mean, they're 3 feet thick. And so he buried his buddy in the wall, and then just moved on, finished the bell tower, blah, blah, blah. He's on his deathbed in the 60s. And he felt like he needed to get it off his chest before he died. So he had somebody contact Rector Todd, who I spoke to. And he went down to Denver in the nursing home where he was dying. And he confessed, I buried my buddy in the wall. And so Eugene Todd said, that's okay. Thanks for letting me know. And as soon as he told the rector the story, he died the next day. And so Rector Todd told me what he had experienced. And you will see in this video, Rector Veit, who's now over in Laramie, tells what he's experienced too. But the interesting thing is there was this, the very popular radio station in Denver, which you could hear in Cheyenne, was KIMN. And so there was this psychic, Lou, can't remember Lou's last name, but she was very well known in the Denver area as a psychic. And so she spent the night in the bell tower with 2 Denver Broncos. and she was broadcasting it live on KIMN. And they got so freaked out, and who knows, maybe it was Hollywood, blah, blah, blah. But they got so freaked out that they ran out of the bell tower, ran down the stairs, and left. 2 Denver Broncos and Lou Wright. Lou Wright was her name. And if you Google it, you'll see that story. I mean, it's out there. But anyway, it's such a fascinating story, and it's so great, and it's such a wonderful church. And Rick Veit is such a good guy where, he's made friends with the ghosts. So anyway, I did this video a couple years ago, maybe 4 years ago with Rick. He took me up and we walked through it. He rang the bell and the whole thing. It's just fascinating. It's a wonderful story.
Well, let's go to that video here right now, folks. You get a chance to watch it.
Just a month ago, a very well trusted person who came to me and said, I heard voices, and I was the only one in the church, and I walked around the outer perimeter and saw no one. So to this day, there's voices that people hear. The organ will play when there's no one at the organ and the organ's not turned on. There are all kinds of noises that people have heard here, and even seen ghosts walking around here. So welcome everyone. My name is Rick Veit, or the Reverend Rick Veit. I'm the rector at St. Marks Episcopal Church. Glad you're here. Come on in and we'll see some more inside this old building. St. Marks has been here from the beginning of Wyoming, 150 years ago, virtually, a little over that. And it was the first church built in all of Wyoming. So when the railroads came through, there were bars and brothels here in Cheyenne, and they realized maybe we ought to have some place that's spiritual as well, so let's build St. Marks. The very first church building or edifice was about a block away at this little A-frame wooden church where Twin Dragons is right now, just right around there. That church has since moved and is really not functioning at this time, but they moved it. And near Hannah. So the new church, the quote new church, where we are now, was built in 1885 and 86. And that's when they built the sanctuary off of the designs of a church outside of London that was built in 1080 AD. The tower was built just after the turn of the century in the early 1900s, so about 15 years after the original church was built. The basic idea of a tower was it was really to give glory to God, to reach up to the heavens and remind people that we're connected with heaven, really. So you've got the beautiful church structure and you've got this tower that's reaching up. So when they built it, and you'll see it, I mean, there's a little circular staircase going up, and to get to the staircase you got to go under the altar. I mean, it's really a great walk. When you get up there, there's a little study that was probably the rector's study, and then above that room is where all the bells are. So I'm going to ring a few of these bells now. Now, different than my faith, which of course you believe in something that you often can't see, or my own feeling is I'm not sure I believe it until I actually see a ghost or hear something, and so I haven't seen a ghost yet, so I'm not sure I believe the story or not. But that said, there's a lot of stories, and people have heard strange things. The story is, when they were building the tower, there were two masons who were Swedish, and they spoke very little English, and they were building up the tower, and one of them fell off the tower and died. And the other one was very nervous about what would happen. Would he be accused of something? He didn't even speak English, so what was he going to do? There would probably be maybe mistrust growing, and so instead of going out and telling people all about it and getting the authorities, the legend is that he kept building the tower over the person, the other Swedish mason. And the walls are thick. I mean, the walls are 3 feet thick.
I mean, look at how thick these walls are. I mean, they're massive. This is nothing like what they built today. This is all stone.
The story is he kept building the tower. The person is, the other Swedish mason is in the tower, in the walls somewhere, and no one ever heard, of course, from the other mason again, and everyone was just wondering, well, what happened of him? And he said, I don't know. I'm not sure what happened of him. Since that time, as I just recently shared, there have been stories of either people walking around here that aren't actually people, sounds that occur, people's voices, the organ playing, and the legend is that the ghost of this Swedish mason is still around and haunting the church. I am still the skeptic, right? As I shared earlier. So we were here with our youth group one night, late at night, trying to have some silence and pray and be spiritual and all this, and all of a sudden we heard this enormous banging start to happen, and we nearly jumped through the roof. It was so frightening. We think it was the boiler, but we're not quite sure, because in these old buildings and old boilers, when steam comes through the pipes, it bangs like crazy. It's kind of exciting, actually, to be in the church during that time. But so anyway, that's the storyline of where we're at today. I still have yet to see the ghosts, though. I'd really like to see them, actually.
What a great story. Oh my gosh. Jimmy, thank you for sharing that video with us. But that's just one of the stories that you have. You've got a couple more stories that we need to talk about today. And one of them involves the Wyoming governor's office. Tell us about that ghost story.
Yeah, actually, this is my favorite one. So I am the incoming press secretary for Governor Jim Geringer. So it's late 1994. And Denny Curran was the press secretary for Governor Mike Sullivan, and such a wonderful guy. It was, he was the former journalist at UPI, and he was good friends with our late friend, Jim Angel, just a great person. And so Denny was showing me, around the governor's office, how things were done, what he did, the whole thing. It was a great transition. And so before the Capitol was restored and the governor's office was restored, in the second room after the entryway, there, and the portraits are still there, but not in the same room. There was a wall that just had the photo of every governor in Wyoming, and they were all the same. They all were the photo and the glass pane over it and everything. And I noticed one of the photos didn't have a glass pane. So I asked Danny about it. I said, why doesn't Alonzo Clark have a glass pane on it? And he goes, it's haunted. And what do you mean? He goes, listen, we have tried to put the glass back on the pane numerous times. Whenever we do it, it falls. So he doesn't like having a glass pane over him. And I go, really? And he goes, yeah. And I said, you're joking. And he goes, no. He goes, try it. It won't last. And so I thought, well, this is awesome. And so I worked late at the governor's office a lot. A lot of us did. But I'm there. And so what I did is I bought a new frame for Alonzo Clark, put it over, and nothing happened. So I'm just there late at night, blah, blah, blah. And one night I hear a crash. True story, Wendy. I hear a crash. And it would have been in 1996. And so it was in the front office, and I walk up to the office. It's probably about 9:30 at night or whatever. And sure enough, Alonzo Clark's photo is on the ground and glass all over the place. And I got to tell you, I just had chills run up and down my back. And I'm looking at this and going, holy cow, not cow. And I'm just freaked. I am freaked.
Oh my gosh, this is fantastic.
So I just left. I left the painting there, or the portrait there. I got my stuff and left. And the next day I told everybody, Denny was right. Alonzo does not want glass over his, and I swear this happened. And so and I told Denny about it, and he goes, yeah, I told you. So we put him back up. We never put glass over him again. And I don't know I haven't been back over there in a while. I don't know what's going on with him, but it absolutely happened. Now, could the painting, could that frame be weighted somehow? Whatever. I don't know. All I do know is it happened. 100% true.
That is absolutely a fantastic, fantastic story. Oh my gosh. All right. Well, we'll have to ask the governor if he's experienced that at some point. Yeah, if he's experienced any strange vibes.
There's ghost stories with the Capitol, and it is, and it can get kind of spooky and eerie at night, but I never felt, it never felt haunted. It never felt anything. It's just this guy didn't like apparently glass over its portrait. I don't know.
Apparently. Jimmy, thank you for sharing your stories.
All right, Wen.
And that's all today for our haunted tour of Wyoming. If you'd like to read more spooky stories, just go to cowboystatedaily.com and search for Haunted Wyoming. You'll find ghost stories to keep you up at night. And who knows, you might have a haunted story of your own. If so, please reach out to us, share your stories, so we might feature it in an upcoming article. Until then, that's it for the Roundup this week. If you missed any of our previous 45 episodes, just go to our website, our YouTube channel, anywhere you get your podcasts, search for Cowboy State Daily's The Roundup. Spend some time with some of the most interesting people in Wyoming. While you're searching, don't forget to check out the Business from the Basement podcast presented by the Wyoming Business Alliance. You'll find great information, ideas, and advice for your Wyoming business. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. See you next week here on The Roundup.